Long-awaited podcast.
The long-awaited podcast.
Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Welcome to the Making Data Simple podcast. I appreciate everybody that listens on a regular basis. Another great guest, Kareem Yusuf. He is the Senior Vice President of Ecosystem, Strategic Partners and Initiatives here at IBM. How interesting is that? He's held roles in IoT, sustainability, product management, and now ecosystem and strategic partnerships. I wanted to get him for two reasons. One reason is this deep expertise for one of the biggest companies in the world, and he's got the perfect radio voice. So this is going to be great. I've never had a guy that has this kind of voice on the podcast, so you're going to wake everybody up today. Welcome, Kareem. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you ever so much, Alan. I'm now all nervous about my voice, but let's do this.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. All right. You should. Have you ever done radio?
Not really, no.
No? Maybe that's a retirement.
The retirement career choice, the alternate. I'll get working on it.
All right. Well, if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself to start.
Well, greetings, everyone. Kareem here. Let's see. 27 years in IBM, civil engineer by training. Did my doctorate in actually expert systems, artificial intelligence for civil engineers. Joined IBM in Hursley because I kind of wanted to get out of academia and focus on how technology was being used in the real world. Started actually with level 3 support for MQ. MQ series as we knew it at the time, WebSphere MQ, some people call it today. Hardback for integration, some others do know it's in there. The world has changed, but it was a great platform to really focus on how technology was being used. And at the time, my focus was the Java APIs and JMS for MQ. And so sat through the explosion of the internet and what I would call e-business. So the integration of backends with the front-end websites over MQ. Parlayed that into a tech sales role. That's what brought me to the US. I was sent on assignment to help with the introduction of Message Broker, or MQSI version 2.1, as we knew it in those days. And my career just evolved from working in the field in tech sales to then product strategy, product marketing, product management. I ran the WebSphere product line for a while, application server and WebSphere commerce. So began to cut my teeth in hardcore product management in those roles. Went from there into M&A, spent quite a bit of time in M&A, really learned another completely different side of the business. In terms of what it means to bring in companies, how companies actually run, how IBM operates. And after that, I moved back to development and I ran development and SaaS operations for what we called in those days the marketing software stack. So a couple of acquisitions, Unica, Coremetrics, Demand Tech, and T-Leaf. That then just kept things going, more product management, more development, broader scope. Eventually became a general manager of a business unit. That's the IoT business unit. And that's where my love for Maximo developed and endures till today. After that, SVP of kind of product management and design, and now ecosystem. So that's kind of the journey.
I was going to start with ecosystem strategy and then leadership. But given you just gave that breadth of experience, I got to start a little bit there. What job out of all of those have you enjoyed the most? Not counting the current one, because everybody always goes with the current one. What do you think has been the most enlightening of that entire set?
Look, I actually will pick 3 jobs for some very different reasons. And really, I'm going to fixate on my roles after I became an executive. Only because I think those are the most formative roles that have defined the trajectory I'm on today, right? I really enjoyed just my time working, in the field and with folks. But I think in my executive roles, my first big one as a director of product management for WebSphere was very core to understanding how a product business runs. I think a lot of what I understand about product businesses began in just running a core product line like WAS and WebSphere Commerce, right? You get really just into it. I would say the second big role I would pick out would be my time in M&A. That was very much shaping in terms of my understanding of various other aspects of business. I'm not an MBA, I'm an engineer, but in that role, learned a lot more about finance, learned a lot more about IP law, learned a lot more about contracts, learned a lot more about what we might call the back office of business, because you have to integrate, you have to understand the companies you're buying, due diligence. That probably would be the second one I'd pick up. And then the third one, I would say, that has been kind of most critical to forming then who I ultimately became as a senior executive was running development and SaaS operations. Because when you run, there are two kind of key things I think you get from that experience. One, what I would call large organization experience, right? That was running teams that have more people than you will ever be able to name, right? And so you begin to learn a lot about what it means to project your intent to a broad organization. How do you communicate? How do you affect your will? How do you listen? Climate. That's a real training ground for that. And the SaaS operations side of it gave me a very, very strong feel for what it means to run a service that people build their businesses on, and what it means when things go down, right? When demand tech wouldn't work, Walmart could not put prices for the promotions, right? That kind of stuff, you kind of really get into it. You learn quick. So I would say those are the three I would pick, because I think they were most formative for different reasons. And then obviously lots of fun being a GM, being an SVP, all that stuff. You now just get into it. But that's what I pick up.
For me, I mean, like I know you started on tech support. I actually started out in tech support as well. Man, I learned so much in tech support. It's kind of like what you said just a minute ago. Problem after problem after problem. Boy, you learn fast. You got to learn fast.
As you recall, in those days, I believe the tool we used was called Retain. I think they got fancy tools now, but we had that green screen Retain, and you'd walk in the morning and you'd sit down and you look at your queue, right? That's how your day began. Chipping away at your queue. And because I was in level 3, so remember, these were the problems that were being passed back after the field. And so I did enjoy the kind of like analytical part of it, like what's going on here? Well, let me read the trace or the FAP or the FAP as we call it, and let me look at that and let me see what is really going on and think about what's happening in the code, and then what defect do we need to raise or fix. So it was a fun time, but yeah,
it is. I mean, I don't think you recognize how fun it is at the time.
Yes,
but later you look back and say, man, I learned so much, and I find that. It's interesting to look at how many people, like our SVPs, GMs, otherwise, that have started out in tech support. I think it shapes you someplace.
It does shape you. It does shape you. I would agree.
So before I move from this question, then I got to ask you, so within all of that, any advice to our listeners in terms of career path? What have you learned, and what would you say as you're trying to broaden your skills and get to the next level or whatever it may be?
Well, actually, the first thing I'd pick on is that word you use, skills. I think you should always think about what are you learning in a job, and how is that learning or those skills gained, how does that parlay to what you might want to do next, right? And both in the context of whatever is the domain you're in, but even more broadly in terms of what does that experience bring to bear. Right, I think about my M&A experience. I apply it a lot in my, business partner, discussions. That comfort with business. I think about my GM experience and all that. But if we just go back to the beginning, I think a lot of it was. I think it's important. I do believe it's important to master your craft, and that means you need to understand the craft you're doing at that point in time. It doesn't mean that's the craft you're going to do for the rest of your life. But do you truly understand it, and do you know what you want, what you might be able to do with it? That's really, to me, my big thing. Understand what you're doing and learn it and do it well. And then always think kind of like N+1, right? And be prepared to discover and explore avenues you might never have thought you would take. If you had asked me when I was a director, would I have thought of myself doing M&A? I would have told you, hell no. In fact, I would have asked you, why in God's name would you even think I'd want to do that?
Well, how'd you end up doing that then?
Because I got some good advice from my GM at the time, and I'm actually having a skip level slash performance review because he would talk to all executives within the GM. And so we get into the career discussion, and he says, "So what do you aspire to be?" And I go, "Well, I'd like to be a general manager." He says, "Of what?" I said, "Well, a software business unit, right?" And he goes, "Well, one of the things you should consider is a stint in M&A." And I said, "Why?" And he said, because a big part of what a GM does is think about companies that they might buy, their inorganic strategy. And you'll learn a lot about what it means to think about that stuff. You'll learn on the ground floor how it really operates, and it can make you a better GM. And
accurate.
It was pretty accurate, and he gave me the shot. I learned a lot from it, but I never would have thought about it. Never in a million years. It was not the normal route at that
But do
time.
you have a plan now? Like you're an SVP of the ecosystem now. Do you know where you want to go next? I won't make you say where that might be, but
I think I'm at a slightly different stage in life and career now. So I actually think maybe a lot more about what I want to do when my I would call it corporate career is over.
Will you share that with us?
Yes, not radio. I'd like to teach.
You should do radio, man. I was hoping for it.
I'd like to go back to academia and teach.
I bet
That's what I think I'd like to do when I finally hang up my
I thought about that
spurs.
too. What are you going to teach?
It's a really interesting question. I'm not 100% sure. It's obviously at the intersection of three things: technology, business, and history. Those are the things I have a lot of interest in, and I think I'll find something in those realms. And is it in a business school? Is it in a what? I wouldn't go like teach programming. I wouldn't be in a comp sci type thing. Like, no, not that. But that kind of intersection of technology, business, and history, probably something in that realm.
You and I might have more in common than I originally thought. So history, tell us more about history, because I love history as well. What are you reading history on a regular basis? Are you studying history? What's the connection?
I like history as a general statement, right? I like particularly historical analysis. There are a few, don't ask me for names, but there's a lady from the U.S. Naval War College who does a lot of analysis on Russia, China, Japan, and decisions made and why people might go to war or not. And just the analytics and listening to her on from a historical perspective is very good. There's another lady, a scholar, Heather Cox Richardson. She does political history. And I always find it fascinating to just listen to the analysis of when has this happened before, what drove those decisions, and how does it map to now. And I like also then technology history. There's another YouTube channel, and he's actually got a Substack called Retrotech, but the YouTube channel is called Another Boring Topic. And this guy researches like VisiCalc, how VisiCalc first came into being and who are the guys and why they created it and all that, or just Microsoft Windows or Excel. Now, anyone on this call who knows what I'm about to say recognizes this software, just you've officially dated yourself. But the most recent one I actually read, this was on his Substack, was on WordPerfect.
Oh, yes. I use WordPerfect.
Exactly. And therefore, you effectively have dated yourself, because most folk are going, WordPerfect? What's that?
I thought it was awesome at the time.
It was very, very cool. I wrote quite a few original papers in WordPerfect and Amy Pro while we're talking about old school software. But you actually learn a lot from the history of how people just decided to create these software packages in history. So that's why I said I like that kind of evolution of technology.
All right. All right. So I'm going to take a step back. Let's go back to ecosystem. What does it mean to be the SVP of Ecosystem and Strategic Partnerships?
Don't know. You tell me. I just work here. I think what it means is to lead this merry band of professionals focused on, quite frankly, developing and deploying our ecosystem aligned with our business, strategy. And so then you ask me, what is an ecosystem? And the academic in me comes out. Would call it in an ideal sense, it's a vibrant community of participants, right? Hopefully aligned around a common objective and working together in some way to achieve it. And some have heard me say this before. I mean, the word has great roots in biology. And if you think about biological systems, just think about the pond and think about all the organisms that come into bear, to create a vibrant, well oxygenated pond, and everybody's living life. And, if you don't get the balance right, the pond gets all murky and everybody dies off. That's what an ecosystem is. Now, in terms of IBM strategy, we need our ecosystem to help us scale our reach and growth, right? That's what it's all about. And so everything I do as I decompose what makes up the ecosystem, as I think about everything we do with partners, strategic, otherwise, the different partner types, service, reseller, build, it's all in that goal of how do we scale our reach more clients, and drive growth and adoption of our technologies.
Why is IBM so invested in the ecosystem right now? And can you give me examples of when it's going extremely well? How do you know it's going extremely well?
It's a very good question. How do you know it's going extremely well? It's actually a question I'm pondering very, very deeply at the moment. And it's a different answer for the different types. But let's go back to what it means to scale a business, right?
Yep.
Because the math is fairly simple. If you build a business and you build a product business, eventually you need to sell it, right? You need to sell products. So one obvious strategy, and at the roots of most companies, you hire a sales force and they go out and sell your products. Mathematically, as you begin to scale and grow, you cannot reach as many customers as you want with a direct sales force. You need others. Just economically, it's not doesn't work out. So you begin to talk about how can you distribute your product, right, through other channels, right? Because it helps you scale, it helps you extend, it helps you to reach people who don't go in. And let's take a very sidebar kind of example of this that might resonate, is maybe more instinctual for folks when you think about product distribution. Let's take Apple, okay? Everybody thinks about Apple and you go, okay, I want to buy an iPhone, or let's even go with a MacBook. Yes, you can buy it online. That's a direct purchase. You could go to the Apple store. That's technically kind of an element of their direct. That's still them. But you can also get a MacBook in Best Buy.
Yeah.
You can technically get a MacBook in other kind of stores and retail outlets. You can get them on other channels like an Amazon, right? Why would a company do that? It's to extend their reach, right? There are people who might want to buy an Apple device, an iPad, that go into a local Best Buy. They're not in a place where there's an Apple store. They're not as comfortable with online buying. How do you scale your reach, right? That's what you're always thinking about. And you cannot get to a business of any scale without building an ecosystem, a channel to do that. And that's the first element I think of when I think about the ecosystem. We call it our sell motion, but think of that as your reseller motion, right? Who can sell this product out there on your behalf, right? Which means they need to understand your product, they need to be able to represent you, blah. And as we think about our select territory element, that becomes really critical because we think about how partners can help us reach more and more into a client base that we cannot reach and address as directly.
How do you know if a partner is suitable? I mean, that's going to represent your brand. Or let me ask it a different way. What is typically the X factor that you're looking for when you're trying to go with a partner or somebody that's going to redistribute your product? Like if you're going to choose Best Buy, how do you know that they're going to do the MacBook service?
So I think there's two things. One of them is particularly underpinning the ongoing transformation work that we're doing, which is what product are you distributing? If you actually look at the history of our channel and our ecosystem, it's actually built, I would call it most firmly around the PC business, right? And so a lot of its DNA sits in distributing hardware. It's not necessarily the same for software and definitely not the same for certain SaaS products. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what are you distributing? And what are you looking for? I think the X factor actually in technology sales and particularly in software sales is skills and knowledge about the technology and the value prop, the ability to drive the outcome that is derived from our technology. Remember, the software that we sell in particular, and indeed our infrastructure hardware, it's not what I would call end user focused, right? It enables a business outcome in some shape, size, or form. And so you're really thinking about the skills and the capabilities of your partner. I think that's an important aspect. And to use a parlance, talk about focus products. So a lot of my focus right now is, do we have the right partner makeup for those focus products? Do we need to recruit? Do we need to develop, enable? How do you judge whether or not they're performing? All right, which really comes down to how well they handle the opportunities you pass them and how many independent opportunities they create themselves, right? That's one element of it. But it has to be said, this whole discussion we've just been having is focused on what I would call the reseller or distribution of sell motion. You have other partner types. You have the service partners, read those as the GSIs. They are out there pushing a solution. And so they are influencing the technology choice that the client adopts. That's a very different set of tools and focus to get them to say, they believe our technology can support the solution set, de-risk their project, is the right technology to use to solve the problems. And so we focus there a lot on designing in, education, making sure that they see it as a win-win value proposition. And then our more nascent is the embedding our technology in other people's solutions. And that's one that we've kind of been really focused on how we develop that.
How do you balance your effort around those motions, all those motions, equally, or do you go?
So I think, and I'll wrap this in, this as kind of a leadership or just a professional kind of lesson in this. You're always prioritizing and reprioritizing, ruthlessly prioritizing what you spend your time on, right? And so my time varies based upon what I'm determining as needs, right? If I think about it in terms of volume of revenue, the sell motion drives the most revenue that we need to do. Without that, without the distribution channel, we don't have an ecosystem. But I have spent probably, if I actually think about the time I spent last year, I spent a lot of time at the beginning of last year on the service partner side, because I felt that if I could nail that, right, and get that right, working with my team, Savio leads that for me, and really get that motions bedded down, it kind of then takes care of itself. And it was also important because we needed to do a reset with our service partners, GSIs, because even on the ecosystem side, we had begun to treat them too much like clients versus partners, trying to sell them stuff instead of getting them to influence stuff. So I spent a lot of time there to kind of get that right? And right now, in general, my time is spent on a bigger question. How do I know our channel is healthy?
Yeah.
And how do I activate partner performance management in that context? That's actually the big question of the day for me right now. And the reason why it's a big question is traditionally, and those of you will not surprise you, a lot of the way we measure stuff is did or did we not make budget?
Of course.
That is not sufficient to understand whether your channel is truly healthy or not. Right? You have to actually go a little deeper under that. We are discovering and exploring and trying to land on what are the right things that give us the leading indicators that actually lets us know that we've got the mix we need.
I got another follow on, and then I'll switch to product strategy. But I came in through the Informix acquisition. And by definition, we had to have a great ecosystem because when we started out, we weren't in many countries, by example. So we had to get to those countries, create an institution there by which they could resell. So it naturally created this ecosystem that we depended on. I guess it brings me to now IBM. How do you fight the, I want to say channel conflict? I don't know if that's because a lot of people may want to sell directly to these clients, but you're saying, no, we're better off going with a partner. Here's why, stay out of that. It's kind of a little bit inventor's dilemma, I want to say, because you may be selling well directly, but to your point, it's not just about budget. It's not about the next quarter. It's about developing these long-term relationships. How do you make that determination, how to pivot there?
What we've settled on, the short answer, and then I'll give some more context, is your client segmentation, right? That's how we've approached that problem. Now, to your point on Informix, if you think of how Informix expanded, they saw the ecosystem as the way to expand that route versus setting up themselves in new countries. At the time when IBM was born, right, we expanded into other countries. It was more the direct route expansion.
Yeah.
And it was just the nature of the beast at the time, right? So for me, it's all about focus. And I think this has been at the heart of what we have been doing with our client segmentation. So, enterprise and strategic accounts, we have very good direct coverage. And I've been pretty clear with our partners that's not where I need your focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
I need your focus in select horizon and in select territory. Or and let me even flip it the other way.
We got some external listeners, so you might want to explain what select.
Right. So the way you should think about this is just think about we do our segmentation based upon spend with us. And so we've got some very large clients who do a large spend with us and they're very well covered. And then we've got growth segments, which would be the select segments, horizon and territory, where we're really focused on growing. And in select territory in particular, it's very much a partner first type approach, right? Horizon is a little bit more balanced depending upon which geography you're in and where they've gone. But that's where I really need the partners focused. And we all agree that, right? And by that I mean all the go-to-market leadership, that's what we want. So once you create that level of clarity, you're kind of able to fixate and focus on then what are you doing to align behavior with that kind of strategy. But with all things, you need a strategy. And you need to know what objective you're going for.
Well, speaking of, let's pivot a little bit to product strategy. You've helped set IBM's product strategy. So let me start out with, what do you think currently differentiates IBM in the market, bar none?
I think, to my mind, we solve problems that are required to keep businesses running. That's in our core DNA. There can be thorny issues, there can be complex issues. Some of them we solve in very simple ways. I mean, and I would actually say, to be honest, part of our core focus, which is not is really making sure that we can be more and more simple and consumable. But I think we solve meaningful problems, valuable problems with technology that enable businesses to do what they've got to do. As I always have told my teams, product teams, ecosystem teams, most people don't wake up in the morning and go, my job is to go use this piece of IBM software.
Something like that. You're right.
Most people wake up in the morning and walk into the office to say, I have to deliver on this outcome. We want to achieve this objective. I think we have developed a technology business specifically that is essential in enabling a lot of those things to be done. And so that to me is at the core of what differentiates us. And that's why you see in this world of AI, as an example, we are really focused on AI for business, AI for the enterprise. What does it really mean to leverage these to actually more effectively and efficiently run your business? And that, I think, differentiates us because we're maniacal in that focus and we're damn good at it.
What if a competitor came in and said, hey, I do AI for business. What is IBM talking about? I do AI for the enterprise. How would you differentiate and say, here's what AI for the enterprise really means, and this is why IBM is well suited for it?
Well, I think it really comes back down to the core context of what does it actually mean to solve enterprise problems. Enterprise problems is never just about the basics of the technology. You have the complex, so let's take AI. You have the complexity of the data that needs to be reached in a variety of different ways and different forms. Enterprises are inherently heterogeneous. So you need, kind of capabilities that can run in, I'll use the word, hybrid environments, right? You need a notion of scale. You need to be able to start with one and go to a million. You need to be able to scale effectively. You need to do this in secure ways. Right, you need to do this with an appropriate nod to governance, regulatory compliance. These are things that are above and beyond just the function of can the software add one and one to give you two. And those are things I think we are very well steeped in with the environments. And by the way, our clients trust us in that regard because circling back to where we began with support, you and I know the beginning is deployment, right? It's not the end. Ultimately, the support over the lifetime, right, becomes extremely important. When you have critical business processes, right? What's the stat? 95% of the world's financial transactions touch a mainframe,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? When you've got critical business processes depending upon your technology, you build a very different reputation. And it's not just hey, it runs today. Are you around for the long term? So I think those are the things that differentiate us, and we're 114 years old.
I got to hit. That's a good answer. I've got to reference the mainframe here for a second because of all the stuff that's been going on with Claude Code and stuff like this. And I was in a meeting the other day, and I heard your name mentioned. By the way, that's what I'm saying. I think maybe you and I share a thought on this because we were talking about modernizing the mainframe, and I know that's the rhetoric out there, but the mainframe is modern. It's been modern for. I mean, that's a ridiculous statement. It's like saying I'm going to modernize a Tesla. I don't know why we're even using this. I don't know why the world is using this. You may modernize maybe some of the applications on a mainframe or something, but this is the most modern, technically advanced solution on the planet. That's why 95% of banks run on it. I was in a meeting and somebody said, Kareem said the same thing. What are your thoughts on that? Am I wrong or what?
No, look, I think with all things, sometimes when you're communicating at large, you're going to have to accept that some of the terminology has already been framed by the body politic, and you could spend a lot of energy trying to truly change it, or you can just write it and get it to where you need it to be, right? And so you get a lot because I think of it as more, I like the idea of attaining the state of a modern mainframe infrastructure, which means the latest boxes, right? Because they are extremely modern. But even more importantly, I think it speaks to your practices around the mainframe. Think about all the investments we're making around AI on the mainframe for systems administration and systems management. I'm speaking here about What's Next Assistant for Z, for example, and how I think that fundamentally changes the way in which individuals will interact with the mainframe and how it gets managed in extremely modern ways. But look, we have this notion of, the narrative of legacy of, it was old, or it's all green screens, although quite frankly, there's a lot of modern things that have been on the mainframe for a very long time. Yeah. But, you get that notion. And so I think of modernizing. If modernizing is the action verb, I think what you're really trying to do is you're modernizing to get to a modern state of play, which is a full spectrum discussion about the hardware, C17, Spire cards, right? All that stuff. It's a statement about the applications of all language types and ilks. It's a statement of the, practices and how you work. I mean, how many people listening actually realize that we run Ansible on the mainframe almost as much as some people still run JCL jobs?
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And so, it's just like, so that's where I do share that notion that I think it's more about changing state than it is just like modernizing a thing. But as I always say, if you're explaining, you're losing. So I just try to get folks to the core elements of what we want them to focus on.
Look, I've done a lot of work around the mainframe, and if you have to push that in the cloud or something, you got to take security out. You got to have your own software for that. You got to do high availability. It's already quantum safe. Yeah. So, I mean, particularly with sovereign AI, I think
I'm a simple believer in horses for courses, right? And so I just think that you always have to look at the motivations of the mainframe bashers. And I will just simply say their motivations are not pure.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Right? They're typically trying to move you to something else that benefits them. I tend to more focus on this conversation from a client's perspective.
Yeah.
They do have concerns about skills. They do have concerns about methodologies and this. They do have concerns about cost. And it's our job to make sure that for the workloads well suited to the mainframe that they have, we give them the path to the most cost-efficient, effective price performant approach to doing this work. And we're doing the right things we need to do to make sure that they can leverage those techniques, right, that they may be using other environments on the mainframe. Ergo, assistant-based interfaces, right? Being able to leverage all the prior skills that they've built and knowledge bases. These are what I believe we have to do, and that's what we are doing. And I think that's what we just focus on.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. It's a long pole in the tent. I think that's the issue. Anyway, but product strategy, back to product strategy, product management. What are you really excited about right now? What really gets you going? And where do you think, whether it's IBM or technology at large?
I think it's a great time to be in the product business, in the software product business in particular, but because that's
even with all the AI naysayers.
Because you can build wonderful products with new technology elements. You can bring wonderful capabilities to, good old Star Wars. We just announced last week DB2 AI Edition.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's being built into that, core competence things. I think of so much of the AI enablement in the products that we have, like, Maximo, I just mentioned DB2 others, but I also think about net new capabilities you can begin to create with these new AI technology bases. Think about Project Bob. Think about Concert, which is fundamentally an AI brain trying to correlate a ton of data to guide you towards the right resiliency profile and actions, right? To me, technology is building blocks. And I find it an exciting time because we have, in this world of generative AI, discovered some new interesting building blocks that can be used to drive meaningful value. Orchestrate as a multi-agent orchestration platform, a control plane for all your agentic AI within the enterprise. I mean, these are interesting things that one can work on. And so I'm always fired up by technology. And I don't want to make it sound just software, I love the Fusion box. I mean, I think what we're doing with Fusion is really very cool. It's a great way to package a bunch of capabilities and, dare I use the word, in a pod, roll in an AI stack. So, look, technology to me has always been a wonderful discussion of advances that give you building blocks that, as a product guy, you think about how you marshal them into a way to solve meaningful problems and deliver value. And that's what we do here, deliver value to our clients. And hey, awesome. Long may it continue.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple leadership questions, and I'll do a quick lightning round as we finish up. First leadership question is, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit before in terms of how to prioritize, but that's the question. As an SVP, you're dealing with a whole bunch of different things, from global strategy 1 minute to operational hurdles the next. How do you manage that context switch?
It's a very interesting phrasing because I am not sure. So I guess I've never thought of it how I manage the context switch, while I do agree with you that the context switch is quite extreme and quite rapid. I guess the way I would answer that is I always have I think in frameworks. So I always have kind of scaffolding frameworks in my mind. And so for me, I'm like, am I looking at a cell motion problem, or am I moving to the build swim lane, right? So even the way I set up my kind of management system and my meetings with my teams are structured on the motions, structured on, I'm either thinking about it in terms of those motions, I'm thinking about it in terms of partner types, or I'm thinking about it in terms of geos and markets. So usually that kind of mental framework allows me to place myself on where am I in the box. And I usually draw these out, right? Like they're just visual kind of like tables for me, or swim lanes, but that's probably my biggest device. Thinking in frameworks and visual, like by that I mean visual outlines, is my biggest way to manage my context switch and know where I am.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. So you've led IoT, sustainability, ecosystems now. What's one leadership principle that crosses all of them that has remained constant for you when you've made those shifts?
Leadership is about leading teams, right? This is the thing that we have to always remember. All those roles may be in different domains, but common to all of them is you're leading an organization, you're leading a team. The most important thing I think that is important is that your team needs clarity on what you're about, what your expectations are, and where you're trying to lead the team to. And so for me, clarity is the most important thing a leader needs to bring to the equation when you're leading an organization on any mission.
Man, this has been awesome. You're doing well. So I'm going to go lightning round. What's an everyday product that is so well designed you think is amazing? Any like software product or hardware? I mean, you mentioned a lot, but what would you say? Oh, just the first one comes to mind.
Are you talking about IBM products or are you talking about any product?
It can be any product.
You know what? I'm going to tell you Apple Books.
Really?
I read a lot of books on my iPad because I like to read a lot. And I just think it's a very well-designed product and interface that I use every day.
Okay, that's good. That's what I needed. Didn't know that. So that's where you're reading an Apple book. Don't you get sick of looking at the screen all the time, though?
Well, but it's an efficiency point because I'm often reading 2 or 3 books at a time, and carrying them around is problematic.
Yeah, I know. I get that. When you're on a plane, you got to do something. I get it. All right. In one word, what is the biggest killer of a partnership, of an ecosystem partnership?
Lack of transparency or loss of trust.
Very good. I like that. What's the most surprising thing you found in IBM's history?
How much of our entire, what I would call ethos, is really shaped by our founder and our founding. I really recommend reading The Man and His Machine. If you read that book, you will actually understand a lot about why IBM is the way it is.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I've read it. It's really good. I totally agree. Everybody should read it, whether you're IBM or not. I did some research on you. You once mentioned in an interview that you got into product management because you were complaining, you were complaining bitterly about a product, and then an executive challenged you to fix it.
Yeah.
What's the last thing you complained about and now you're tempted to fix?
Well, it's not the ecosystem. I can promise you that much. I can promise you that much. And I'm staying mum on the rest.
All right. Last question. What's true that you know is true? This is my favorite question of all time. What's true, but no one agrees with you on it? Well, you got to give me one. You got it. You're thinking about it.
Wow, that is a really good question. What is true and nobody?
You know to be true, but you can't get anybody to agree with you.
I'm even more awesome than people are willing to accept.
That's awesome. Fantastic. I appreciate your time today, man. So, hey, listeners, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit us on the podcast. Hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. We're going to get great guests like you just had. So thank you. I appreciate you listening. Rate us wherever you are. I'll talk to you next time on the podcast. See you.